Welcome to the Rose Bros podcast. The following is a conversation with Jamie Kotlewski, owner of the Eastern Slopes Roasting Co. We sat down for part 2 of our ongoing conversation on everything to do with coffee. Jamie gave us an explanation on the origins of coffee, dark versus light roast beans, natural coffee processing methods, Robusta versus Arabica beans, what espresso coffee really means, and a lot more. Jamie's passion and expertise on the process of roasting and producing coffee will leave you craving a cup. So after the show, check out rosebros.ca or easternslopesroastingco.com and get yourself some high quality, freshly roasted coffee. Enjoy. Jamie, good morning.
Hey, good morning, Trevor. How are you?
I'm great. How are you?
Oh, good.
You are a coffee expert.
I suppose if you put it like that, expert's a loose term, maybe. How about that?
Yeah. You're probably a better roaster than me, that's for sure. Anyways, so.
Yeah. I guess I've done a few things with the roasting and the brewing and stuff. So yeah, it keeps it fun.
How's Eastern Slopes these days?
It's been pretty good. We've got a couple new coffees that have just come in. So I've got two new Ethiopian ones, and then I got a really nice Colombian one that I just picked up the other day. So been looking forward to getting some profiles on that and getting some tasting on there, and it's exciting for some new coffees.
With COVID, everyone's still drinking coffee, thankfully. Business is steady.
That's one thing that hasn't really changed is, people still drink coffee. There's no question about that. The staples of the comfort, like the sort of comfort things, that's still going.
Consumer goods.
Yeah, a lot of those things don't change. And I guess in a lockdown pandemic, it's not apocalyptic. So it's not,
yeah, exactly.
we still have our normal things, but.
So what kind of coffee are you drinking these days?
So this one it's a Costa Rican coffee. It's a naturally processed one. It's different than ones I've had in the past. So it's definitely a little more on the funky side, but really nice, sort of like a chocolate cake kind of flavor to it. It's kind of like cherry because it's got that fruit, the kind of fruit from it. So I call it my Black Forest cake coffee. It's quite nice.
Dark roast?
So this one I keep it lighter just because of the processing. When I say natural process, what that means is there's a few words for it. So there's natural process, dry processing. This is sort of the original way that coffee was done, because as it's picked from the trees, coffee started, in sort of Ethiopia and these sort of African countries, like really dry, really hot. So what they would do is you take the coffee cherries, they lay them out on these beds. The coffee seed is actually inside the fruit. So the fruit will dry on there, and then they use a machine and they pulp the fruit off. So that's where the natural, quote unquote, sort of comes from, is it's sort of the original processing. So that's when that cherry kind of dries right with the seed, it kind of imparts that sort of fruity flavor right to the seed. So that's why these ones do have that kind of berry kind of fruit to it in the flavor profile. And so the reason this one I usually do a little bit on the lighter side is because it dries right on the seed. There's lots of those sugars on the outside of the actual coffee so when you roast it, if you roast it too dark, that sugar it can kind of burn a little bit. So you have to be a little bit careful with if you over roast these ones, they kind of have that burnt sugar flavor. So it's not super desirable. So that's why I keep it more of like a medium, lighter roast.
I've come across darker roasts that taste a little sweeter, but in this case, the lighter roasting brings out the sweetness.
Yeah. This one, it definitely has, if you roast this one dark, the sugars on the outside of the bean, like they make that bitter sort of flavor. So this one, it actually is quite nice when you on the lighter side. And there's some thought that the natural processing, that there's some development of the coffee seed, right within the seed itself, so that when you're roasting it, you it already has some of those developed flavors just based on sort of how it's been processed and kind of sitting in the sun there for a while.
Natural processing would be compared to someone using machine to process it?
Well, so like they still would need a machine to pulp off the dried the dried fruit. So they use like a pulping machine that would kind of scrape off the fruit off the seed.
Okay.
So that's kind of compared to a wash process, where a wash process, they pulp the fruit off the seed before it's dry. So it usually those types of places are done, or those types of processing are done in places where there's more access to water. So if you think, like South America, Central America, like they have rain seasons and things like that. So water is not a concern compared to, say, Ethiopia. So they'll it's called a wash process, where they will pulp the cherries and then wash them in a tank, and kind of wash all that fruit off.
Oh, okay.
And then once that fruit's washed, then they put it and dry it. So anywhere, depending on, the places, 10 to 2 weeks, or 10 days to 2 weeks or something like that, it gets dried. And that's with the fruit already off the seeds.
Coffee's a lot like wine. There's so many variables that go into making it. Do you notice a lot of these various variables really affect the taste?
Yeah, absolutely. So apparently there's more flavor molecules and things in coffee than there is wine. So in terms of like different variety of flavor. That's what I've heard anyways. I think the big thing is like you have to kind of just practice drinking different coffees, tasting different coffees. And like wine, there's, like a Malbec to a Cab Sab or something like that. Like there's differences in how you make wine. Is kind of more the variety of the grapes matters quite a bit. In coffee, that's starting too. So we've sort of started to learn more about the different origins of the coffees, the different varietals that are out there. So there's some that are more valuable, is not the right term, but kind of sought after.
Desired.
Yeah, it's more desirable. So a popular one these days is a geisha variety, it's called, and that's a pretty popular coffee to have. And it has its own sort of distinct floral notes to the coffee that you don't really get with other varieties of coffee. So, the species matters of the coffee bean, but the processing matters too. And
exactly,
you do get better at tasting them as it's just like wine. You have to practice and you have to taste lots and you have to research, but you do start to be able to pick those things out pretty easily.
Coffee even has varietals. What does a varietal mean for coffee drinkers?
That's kind of where something like a geisha is one varietal. There's all sorts of varietals that are, we're still learning about. In Colombia, they'll have several different species of trees, and there's Colombia varietal, Caturra, Catui, Typica.
Yeah.
So
is it the berry type?
As far as I'm aware, it's just sort of like the species of the coffee Arabica. When you look at those tree of life kind of things, where you have different species, it's just sort of one of in the Arabica sort of. You're taking me back to my biology days of the genus and those types of things. So so it's just one of them, and people are experimenting with crossing different species. So the people take a Bourbon variety, they take red and yellow, they cross it, and they get a pink. It's called pink Bourbon, and that's a more rare variety.
And then of all the varietals, those kind of roll up into two branches, the Arabica and
the Robusta.
Robusta, right.
Yeah. So most of what you drink, the vast majority of stuff that you drink in probably North America is all within the Arabica sort of group. So all of the ones that I've mentioned before. The Robusta is definitely something that it's not as popular. It has a higher caffeine content, So I think in the last podcast we talked about some that these supercharged coffees, they use that Robusta variety. So it's not quite as popular of a flavor. It's pretty popular it's mixed into a lot of these like sort of classic Italian roasts that if you're in Italy and you have coffee there, it'll have that Robusta in it. So, and that's sort of more typical of what you would have, when people say Italian espresso, that's what you have there.
Does it lend itself well to espresso?
I think it does. It's not, they don't use it like exclusively, but it's usually as part of a blend. It does make a really heavier, like that crema on the espresso. So that's like that classic Italian sort of drink, where in North America here and specialty coffee, people are getting into these really light roasted, super high extraction coffees that they use for espresso. And the espresso shot it's almost more like a filter coffee, like a batch brew coffee, than it is like a classic espresso, what people are used to, where it's that really thick and heavy. It's kind of the opposite now. So it's just different styles of drink, and they each have their place. So it's nice to have, you can find out what you like when you taste different ones.
I think a lot of people will get confused when they hear the word espresso. They think it's a type of coffee, but in reality, it's just the form of making the coffee, right?
Absolutely. So people, and it doesn't help that a lot of the sort of big coffee things, they say, oh, it's an espresso roast or it's an espresso coffee. So the labeling is kind of confusing, but typically it's been darker roasted coffees that are used as espressos. And that's in the last like 5-6 years, that's kind of changed, but that's what people are used to on the labeling for the last decade. If people have had, you look at the grocery store and you have an espresso roast and it's pretty dark, oily bean, and that's what they're used to.
So in layman's terms, basically it's just a dark roast, and then the espresso term is how you prepare it, more or less.
That's right. So espresso typically means that you're brewing a coffee under, quite a high pressure. So that would be, in an espresso machine, where like at a coffee shop, when you get a latte, or at Starbucks where they make it in their big machines, it's under pressure, as opposed to like a drip coffee that, it just brews where the water pours on top. There's no pressure there. So it's just the matter of how it's made.
Another thing that I think people are confused on, and I'm confused on, to be honest, is the difference in caffeine content between a light roast and a dark roast. I've read lots of different accounts. Some say that the dark roast has less caffeine. I bet I read one the other day. I think he was on the Kicking Horse website saying it was just a matter of how you make it.
So what I've kind of seen and what I've read is, typically what I think that people think is that the lighter roast is more caffeine content.
That's what I thought.
Yeah, that's my perception of what people believe. So I think what I've can kind of see from what people talk about when you look at the chemistry within a coffee bean, that as you roast a coffee, you don't really lose caffeine content. So it's like 1 or 2% of the bean has, that's how much caffeine there is per bean. And that doesn't change. So if you roast light, roast dark, it doesn't change. But when you roast a coffee bean, as you roast it darker, you lose more moisture and you lose more matter from the coffee. So, like when I roast a coffee on like a lighter roast, I lose about 12 to 13% of mass. Right. So, and then if you roast it darker, you might lose 15 or 16%. So in some ways, a darker roasted bean concentrates the coffee more. Concentrates the caffeine more, because you've lost more mass, but you haven't lost any of the caffeine. So it may be that a dark roast has more caffeine per bean. But when you grind up a darker roast, it makes a fluffier, sort of bigger grind, because the bean is less dense. So you're exactly right when you said it depends on how you make it. Because if, some people are making coffee in their coffee machine with 2 scoops of coffee and then they put their water in and away they go. So if the beans and the grounds are fluffier, then you might use less coffee. But if you weighed out, a certain amount of grams, you might put in more coffee of a lighter roast. It really, I think that the whole caffeine content is not something that is, you're probably not going to notice, like if you actually measured it between a light roast and a dark roast. If you put more coffee per water, you're going to get more caffeine.
Yeah, exactly.
That's all it comes down to. I mean, that's simplified. That takes it from my really long explanation to the easy one. Is more coffee, more caffeine.
Absolutely. That's. I think my brother told me that once. He said, "Why don't you just drink more coffee?" And I was like,
Exactly. So yeah, and that's why, like espresso, people say, "Oh, it's with espresso, you're really concentrating how much coffee you're making, right? Like making 40 grams of espresso. So
right.
You've concentrated all that caffeine into 40 mils of fluid, where if you took 20 grams of coffee and made it into a filter coffee, you'd have 280 mils or something like that. So,
right.
So if you drank the equivalent espresso amount, you'd be having a lot of caffeine for the same amount. Yeah.
At the same time, I'm not sure if it's just me or whether it's true or not. When I drink a light roast at Starbucks, for instance, I think we talked about this also, it just seems to really hit you that much harder and wake you up.
Yeah, it depends on, it all kind of depends on the brewing and how they make it, right? So I've never worked at a Starbucks, but they have their set parameters for how standardized across the stores, right? So they know exactly how much to put in, and it definitely could be that they just put a little bit more coffee in per batch than maybe they would on their darker roast. So it definitely could wake you up a little more with that extra caffeine content.
They also, I think it's Death Wish coffee also. They have the world's strongest coffee. They mix in a Robusta bean maybe or something like that.
Yeah, most likely. Yeah, exactly. So you get a little bit more bang for your buck when you mix in that Robusta variety.
Of all the variables that you kind of are aware of right now, are there certain variables that stand out as more important than the others when making coffee?
I think it starts with a good bean, right? So obviously Rosebros, Eastern Slopes, that's a great place to start for your coffee.
Shout out to Rosebros and Eastern Slopes. Yeah.
there you go. That's right. That's probably the most important part is what you start from, right? So having a fresh roasted coffee, something that's roasted, within a couple of weeks to a month or two, is a really great place to start. A lot of the stuff that you would buy off the shelf in a grocery store, we have no idea when it's roasted. Yeah. It could have been roasted 6 months ago, right? So the freshness is definitely a big factor in what makes a great cup of coffee. Depending on if you have a good quality coffee grinder too, because that does make a difference in having something that grinds coffee consistently. And that's probably the biggest variable in brewing is a consistent grind. So if you're chopping it up, in a mortar and pestle or a blade grinder, you're going to have pieces that are big and small and dust and big chunks of half beans. So something that gets you a consistent grind is important for brewing as well.
When you get down to actually growing and making the coffee, is there a step along the way that's more important than the others, like the sugar variable, for instance?
Are you talking about at the farm level?
Yeah. Is there something that's more important than, other variables?
There are certain things that coffee producers are looking at when they are processing their coffee. So a big thing, and this is kind of getting a bit out of my realm of expertise, but coffee producers, they're using more technology to make sure that their moisture content and things like that are at a level that is not going to be a detriment to the coffee. So, when you were asking before about the different processing, when they dry coffees, whether it's a natural process or the wash process, there are certain targets that they want to hit with water levels and moisture, and there's another water level, moisture, and water activity. So it's sort of how the water is interacting with the coffee. Because if you dry a coffee on a bed and then package it in a bag when it's still wet. And if it's too wet and you ship it across the world, you're going to get it and it's going to be funky or moldy or something like that. So it's really not going to be, even if it's like the best coffee in the world and it's a super top level coffee and it's not dried to the correct specifications, it's going to be a bust. Yeah. So at the farm level, that's important. You know, the exporters and the importers are the ones that are sort of controlling some of those things. And so people are doing different, you know, and they're experimenting with, you know, different fermentations of coffee and things like that to sort of bring out these other flavors. But that's definitely a big portion of the storage of the green coffee before it gets, you know, to the roaster.
I remember watching a thing on Netflix about wine and how everything from the soil to the weather that year, the sunlight, and everything else in between really affects the wine. So obviously the same is true for coffee.
Absolutely. So I've had coffee from the same farm, you know, a couple of years in a row now, and the coffee's different year to year.
Yeah.
So, and it's the exact, like you said, with the wine, it's, you know, it all depends on, you know, so they say, oh, it's a good year, it's a bad year, whatever. But wine's in some ways a little bit not hard. Well, I guess you can take a wine that was made one year and you can store it, you know, for 20, 30 years, right? So where coffee, you can't really, it's hard to preserve, say, one year's worth of coffee. You know, to preserve the beans from a specific year is a little bit more difficult, but it's very similar. And I don't think people realize that when you are getting these coffees, right? That it changes year to year.
Do you think most people realize that when they're drinking coffee, or do most people just think it's either good coffee or bad tasting coffee?
I don't think people realize it. And that's one thing that in this, we're talking, you know, like now we have these sort of third wave, high-end coffee shops. You know, you're getting all these really fancy things, like, and even the coffee that I get, like I get one coffee, and then next year I'm selling a similar or the same coffee from the same farmer, but it's different than the year before, and that's okay because I'm really small. But you have to hand it to some of these people that are doing this on a massive scale. So, you know, you look at even Tim Hortons and Starbucks, they're making the same coffee the same way that tastes the same for years. Yeah, that's right. True. And people are used to that. Their Tim Hortons double, and they want it to taste a certain way. So they're blending these coffees like from all over the world, and they're dealing with the same things that we are. Like they have, you know, their coffee from Colombia, all of a sudden this year might taste way more fruity. And they're like, man, we have to get that fruit flavor out of our blend because that's not what our customers want. So they have a tough job making that the same all the time, and it has to be consistent. So there's a skill in that as well. In some ways I have it easier because I just get a coffee that I like and I just share it with my friends, but they have, you know, billions of coffee drinkers that they have to please. So I'm like, man, that's tough.
People are fickle too.
Absolutely. Like, you know, when they change their dark roast, it's like a big thing. People are either upset or happy. Like you can't please them. So.
Oh yeah. Well, I've had people comment on our espresso and how the flavor changed. I'm sorry, but you know, that's hard.
And you know, if you had like a whole bunch of shareholders that are like, you have to please, like it makes it tough to manage that too.
Is disease a big issue with coffee crops?
So there definitely is disease. Like I don't know that much about all of them, but I think there's something that's called leaf rust is a bad one. And in some of these places it can devastate their crops, and certain varieties, they're more resistant to that leaf rust sort of disease. So I don't know exactly which ones are, but you know, so people are working on they'll try and grow a variety that's maybe a bit more resistant to leaf rust in an area where that's a little bit more of a problem. So they definitely can, you know, that's definitely on the farm level that, you know, they have to adapt to those types of things.
I'm reading the story of United Fruit, the banana company, and apparently a lot of strains of bananas had huge disease problems when that industry first got going. And so they would lose an entire strain of banana.
Oh, wow. So then did they have to, like, they had to switch their species of their banana that they're using?
Yeah.
You know, I think people forget that things like coffee, you know, most people just buy it on their way to work, but it's definitely an agricultural product. So, and it's an agricultural product grown in way out in these far remote places, right? And it's grown on a small scale. So,
yeah, I mean, how fickle it is. And then, yeah, all the variables, you just don't realize what goes into it.
oh yeah, and it you know, it can be devastating if you have, you know, if your crop gets wiped out. Because coffee is also something like you can't just start a new variety. You can't just like plant them and then next year have coffee beans. Like it's like a 4 to 5 year process to like get these little seedlings going and then grow them into plants and then get them into plant them and they can actually produce things. So it takes time to get it done.
Yeah. And then in the case of this United Fruit Company, it was big business. So when an entire crop goes away, that's millions of dollars and thousands of jobs, and it adds up into, it's not just,
yeah. So where was that mainly grown then?
Well, in the end, they had land everywhere. I mean, they had like 3/4 of the Guatemala land rights at one point.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
And they had, I guess the guy's name was Samuel Z. Murray. Did really well. And that's where the term Banana Republic, I think, originated from him.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
So they would install these guys to run the country and get kickbacks and tax breaks. And
yeah, because I think like bananas aren't grown, they're not grown in like the States, I don't think, right? Like it's usually these like sort of tropical places. So
yeah. And it just reminded me of coffee a lot.
Yeah, exactly. Because it's the same sort of climates that these places are done, right? Like there's a few places in the States that I think California has a couple coffee places that they grow coffee, but it's pretty small scale. And I think it was Blue Bottle Coffee in the States. They had I don't know if it was their farm or they were getting coffee from California, but and then obviously Hawaii has coffee as well. Those are kind of like the only places in the States that grow it.
That's an interesting story, the Blue Bottle story. That guy did really well.
Yeah, I have one of his books, and just hearing about how he started and, you know, kind of worked his way, you know, growing the company. And they were kind of one of the first big ones in the States to do this sort of third wave sort of style of coffee, right? So yeah, now they're pretty big. They have places in Japan, and they've grown a lot.
He went the cafe route, I read. They have a ton of cafes.
Yeah, I've been to, I think a couple of years ago, we were in New York just on like a holiday, and we went to Blue Bottle Cafe for the first time. And I think they have one in Seattle too, because, you know, Seattle's nice and close to Calgary. So we've been there a few times. Well, I guess relatively close. So we've driven there for some, you know, vacation, and we've had Blue Bottle there too.
It's interesting because some companies decide to go that cafe route. Others don't. Kicking Horse would be one that chose, they barely have one cafe. Everything's closed right now.
We went to Invermere in October, and we wanted to go to the Kicking Horse Cafe, and it was closed. They said, "Well, we might be open in the spring. We'll see."
yeah, exactly. I don't think they even care.
Yeah, exactly. And they're quite the story too of, apparently the lady that started, she's roasting in her garage, you know, that's how her story started. And then now look, they got bought out by a big, you know, Italian company, and now they have distribution everywhere. So they've been bought a couple times, I think, by like a smaller, you know, kind of private equity firms, and then now get more distribution, and here you go.
Coffee, if you do it right, it can be good business.
yeah, exactly. It is tough to kind of get it going, but like you see some of these, look at Starbucks, right? I mean, they're a massive company now, right? One of the top, you know, Fortune 500s, right?
I read his story the other day, and he was one of the first ones to bring espresso bars, the espresso cafe theme to the States.
Okay.
But I didn't know, I don't know if you know this, that Pete's Coffee, he used to run Pete's Coffee, and those two
Yeah.
companies were like owned by the same people at one time.
Oh, okay. No, I didn't know that. That's interesting.
He didn't start out a roaster. He kind of came in and worked with the guys that did Pete's Coffee.
Yeah, because I've been to the first in Seattle. There, the first Starbucks there down by like on the pier there,
Pike's Place. Yeah. I didn't know there was that history of coffee and
Yeah.
how those two companies are related.
Like these days, it's definitely with the pandemic, it's hard, right? Coffee shops are one of the places that people just they meet and they
Yeah.
you go to a coffee shop, you buy coffee. Like it's the pandemic's I think been challenging for. You had Phil and Sebastian, their guys were on here a couple podcasts ago too, and they're talking about the challenges they've had there. So hopefully, once things maybe get a little more back to normal, that people just want social interaction, and coffee shops are a really great place to do that.
Absolutely. The history of coffee shops, that's how they started basically, was just somewhere to go and talk to people.
Yeah. And isn't it Starbucks, or it used to be their like saying was your third home? Isn't that what it was?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So that model of, and that rings true for a lot of these places that, local coffee shop is definitely a place where you go and, meet your friends and
Of all the coffees that you've tasted and whatnot, what was your favorite? What do you lean towards?
it's just more of a personal preference.
Okay.
Like I like lots of different coffees, obviously, because I get different ones. I have 3 or 4 at a time that I'm usually roasting that I really like. I often like the naturally processed coffees. Like I was saying, they just have that. I think it was maybe one of the first coffees that I've had years back that you smell it and you can smell that there's something different with the coffee, and you taste it, and it has it can be a bit funky. It has that sort of heavier fruitiness to it. And it's just so different than what a normal quote unquote coffee tastes like. So I definitely have a little soft spot for those coffees. So that's why I have an Ethiopian natural right now. Then I have this Costa Rican one. They're just so different than a typical coffee. I really like, like a nice, clean, a Colombian coffee that has lots of nice clarity to it and things like that. But just these natural coffees are just something special to me. Yeah. Not everyone likes it because it has its own sort of, you can smell a coffee and you can say, oh yeah, this is a naturally processed coffee. You can tell. So I like that. Some people don't, but that's why it's like a wine, right? You like certain types and you don't like others.
Light roasts in that case?
Yeah, for the most part, I'm roasting these a little bit lighter. I don't do too many dark roasts. So most of my coffees I roast light to medium. And it's sort of like if you take, because I like to have the origin flavors of the coffee kind of shine through. So I don't want the roast to overpower it. So I usually do it on the lighter side. If you go to like high-end steakhouse, right, they're usually not recommending that you get their steak super well done, right? Like they
for sure
usually recommend it like a little bit more on the rarer side, and don't, because if you burn a $100 steak or a $10 steak, they kind of taste the same. So it's kind of like coffee.
A favorite locale? Do you have one where you source from?
I don't think I have. Most of them I get they're Ethiopia, Colombia, and that's most of what the importer that I work with he gets. Although he gets a couple of these Costa Rican and these Kenyan ones they're pretty special. Like Kenyan coffees. Kenyan can be really high in acidity. They're super bright. They have lots of punch to them. So I've had a couple of those that have been really nice.
The one from Sumatra where the rats eat it.
The civet coffee, right?
Kopi luak.
Okay. And I think it's like a ferret or a rat, or when we talk about the processing where you pulp the fruit from the cherry, essentially that's the animal doing that for you.
Exactly.
So they eat the fruit and then they poop out the seed and then the seeds get roasted. So I think it's probably a bit overrated. I don't know, but I don't know if I've actually had it before, but then there's like the whole, people are a little bit with the animal rights stuff with that. Like they're not super thrilled on, force feeding these
Right.
civets, all these fruits and things like that. So
Asian palm civet.
okay.
Cherries are fermented as they pass through the civet's intestines.
Yeah, so it does its own processing, I guess. That's one way to do it.
And it did have it. It was good. But, I mean, yeah, I guess there's some issues with production in that scenario.
Yeah, and it's like super expensive too.
Yeah.
I think it's probably worth trying, And, you sort of get, when you try different types of coffees, you develop a taste for, the regions, and you can't really, like, I'm not to the point where I could like taste the coffee and know exactly where it's from, but you kind of, as you taste more, you get a sense of the what else is out there. Like, I know I like craft beer too, and all these places, they talk about, they put this types of hops and this variety of hop at this time in the brew, and I still don't. If you're really good at that stuff, what a Cascadia hop tastes like, but I kind of don't. But I still know what I like, even though I am not super specific on that stuff. So you don't need to be a coffee expert to find a coffee that you're really passionate about.
Well, that's been the case with Rose Bros.
Yeah.
I'm not an expert, I'll admit it, but I think we've got a handful of decent products.
Absolutely. So you find stuff that you like, and you find stuff your customers like, and away you go, right? You don't need to be in the coffee lab, doing all these experiments to get these certain extractions to find something that's really good, right? So,
I mean, I think it's probably helps maybe over the years, but at the same time, while you're running a business for one, and then if it tastes good, it tastes good.
Yeah, and there's no discounting that. Like when you had, I can't remember exactly who it was from Phil and Sebastian.
Phil.
It was Phil. So, those guys are engineers. And
he is an expert.
So, yeah, like they've got their stuff dialed in, and they've built their own, you can look on their blogs, they've built their own kind of coffee roaster. Like they modified it in their cafes. Like they've done, their water that they have coming into their cafes. Like they have these reverse osmosis like setups, and then they're blending back in other waters that are with real-time monitoring, where they're programming the amount of dissolved solids in the water, and it's constantly changing. Like they've done, a really bang up job on stuff like that, so
yes,
there's room for both, and
yeah,
you can do it how you like.
Well, in the case of Rose Bros, Eastern Slopes is maybe a little more technical, but it's also the goal is to kind of give back with reforestation, and so it's kind of
Absolutely.
all these things mixed into one. And
yeah, totally. Like it's because you guys are doing the one tree planted, and
try and give back a little.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, like with some of the stuff, like I'm a member of the Backcountry Hunters and Anglers Association of Alberta, and I'm a member of Trout Unlimited, and those are the places that I like to spend my time when I'm not working, not roasting coffee.
Exactly.
And you kind of have the same sort of hobbies and stuff like that. So it's important to be a part of those groups and to make sure that you protect the things that you love about where you live.
How important do you think the real technical aspects of the business are versus just running a good business at the end of the day?
The technical portions of your product, I think they are important, because you have to have a good product that people like to drink. So, but it's not everything, obviously, because if you look at places that have, a huge reach of coffee, like Starbucks and Tim Hortons, like these are companies that, like they make billions of dollars a year.
They're good businesses.
Yeah, they're fantastic businesses. And there's issues with as businesses grow, and there definitely is things that there's other challenges that happen, but you do have to have a good product, especially in a market like we're both in Calgary. There's a lot of really good coffee shops that have really good coffee, and they do the technical side like they do a bang up job on that stuff, right? So you do have to have something that people really want to drink, and then you have to start from there. And the bar is set really high because now it's so easy to go. I can order coffee if I want from Denmark, and I can get this coffee that's shipped to my door like relatively quickly.
Yeah.
So you do have to have a good product, but when you look at, beer and stuff like that, people drink Coors Light and they drink Kokanee, and maybe that's not your jam, but for some people that's good and that's what they like. So it's important to have that, but it reaches different people.
Yeah, it's kind of like you got to have a good product, but you also have to be able to run a good business too at the end of the day.
Absolutely. You could have the best product, but if you can't market it,
yeah,
you can't sell it, like it doesn't matter.
I think we talked about this. The guy who started Samuel Adams beer, he was one of the first craft brewing guys. He started out contract roasting his beer, but at the end of the day, he was just really good at business too.
Yeah, exactly. So that's a huge portion of it.
Yeah.
Yeah, you have to have both.
That's cool. That's a great coffee conversation. Why don't we talk about the coal thing? We won't get too political about it, but
sure.
I know one thing you are passionate about is a recent issue that's come up in Alberta with coal leases, I believe. Maybe you can...
Yeah, for sure. So one of the things, Eastern Slopes kind of it stands for the Eastern Slopes of the Rockies is kind of where the name comes from. So like I talked about before, was different fishing zones or different, it's the Eastern Slopes kind of from BC east, right? So Calgary's in the Eastern Slopes 1 fishing zone, places like Red Deer, Eastern Slopes 2. And so those are just when you look at fishing management stuff, that's exactly what it means. So one of the things that's recently come up is some changes to some of these coal leases that have, it's more in southern Alberta, kind of around like Coleman and Bellevue and the Crow's Nest. And there's been some changes to some of the legislation, I believe, in how those will be managed. And like you said, you don't want to get too political on this stuff. I know that resource development within Alberta is a very important thing because, we have to
pay the bills.
We have to do those things responsibly, but we need that because that's the bulk of our industry is, that's a big source of people's jobs and how they put food on the table for their family and how they power their own economies, in the towns and the cities that they work in. So, exactly that resource development is something that is still very important.
But so is the environment.
Yeah. So I don't envy legislators trying to find that balance between allowing resources to be developed sustainably and to protect places that people recreate and people explore. So this coal thing has come up that there's the potential that it could be abused, and these companies are leasing huge tracts of land in places that are very sensitive to industry. So like I said, I'm a member of Trout Unlimited. They've done a lot of work in some of the places down in the Old Man River watershed where they've, rehabbed a bunch of these headwaters to particularly sensitive spawning areas for like the bull trout and cutthroat trout, which are endangered species. And, those are the fish that, we like to go fishing and that's why you're out there, is to go fishing for these fish. And if they're not there, well, then that's whole habitats of stuff that'll be destroyed. So it was just I posted about it to just talk to your MLA about some of if you have concerns about it. There's lots to read on the internet about it, kind of for and against. So don't want to get too much into it, but it's something that we just need to be aware of, that it will be affecting some of the places that you might not have access to land to go fishing and camping and hiking in because a company's taken over a lease of an area. So that's one thing that these bigger advocacy groups they're a lot better than I am because they know more about it. So Backcountry Hunters and Trout Unlimited, they issue statements on stuff like that. So that's why I support those groups as well.
Where can people find more info about the issue? So
if you could go like the Backcountry Hunters and Anglers There's an Alberta chapter. Trout Unlimited has like a Calgary chapter. There's an Old Man chapter, which is in southern Alberta. They'd have lots of information on that as well.
Cool. Well, that was a great conversation.
Well, thanks, Trevor. It's always good to do this again. And I could talk coffee for hours. So
you really get into it.
Yeah, exactly. It could probably be time to cut me off, right?
Do you take cream in your coffee?
So I usually don't, no.
Okay.
But I still like lattes with milk. So I can meet halfway. How about that?
Okay. I'm a cream guy. I don't care. I'll just personally.
You like what you like. That's okay.
Sacrilege to some coffee roasters, but
that's okay.
I don't care. Anyways.
Yeah, thanks again for having me.
Hey, thanks for listening, everyone. Hopefully you enjoyed the episode. If you liked what you heard, check out rosebros.ca, where we will have upcoming shows. You can also find our coffee and chocolate there, where we plant one tree for every bag or bar sold through our partnership with One Tree Planted, a cool non-for-profit organization focused on global reforestation. Until next time, happy coffee drinking.